The air smelled like pine needles and something sweet, my grandmother's famous sweet potato casserole, I was almost certain, even before I cut the engine. My son Theo was already unbuckling his seatbelt from the back seat, craning his neck toward the house like he always did, trying to spot her through the kitchen window before she spotted him. "Is Grandma gonna make the marshmallow ones this year?" he asked. "She always makes the marshmallow ones," I said. He grinned and pushed the door open, and for just a second, standing there in the driveway with the November air cold on my face and the sound of leaves skipping across the pavement, I felt genuinely happy. Not the cautious kind of happy I usually allowed myself, where I was already bracing for something to go wrong. Just regular, uncomplicated happy. Thanksgiving at my grandmother's. Theo in his good sweater. Everything exactly as it should be. I didn't even make it to the porch steps. The front door swung open before I could knock, and my brother-in-law Seb filled the frame. Not my grandmother. Not my aunt. Seb, who had married my older sister Ivy 3 years ago and had spent most of that time finding ways to make me feel like I was always standing slightly outside whatever room everyone else was in. "Hey," he said. Just that. Not a question, not a greeting really. More like an acknowledgement that I had appeared somewhere I wasn't supposed to. I looked past him into the hallway. I could hear voices from the dining room. My uncle's laugh, the clatter of something being set on the table. "Where's Grandma?" I asked. He shifted his weight, blocking the doorway more completely. "She's resting." "She was resting at noon when I talked to her on the phone too," I said. "She said to come at 3. Plans changed." He said it the way people say things when they're hoping you'll just accept it and leave. "It's a smaller gathering this year. Family only." I almost laughed. Almost. "I'm her granddaughter, Seb." He looked at me for a moment, then looked at Theo, then back at me. "Ivy should have called you," he said. "I'm sorry. It's just, this year's different." "Different how?" He didn't answer. He just started to close the door, and I stood there on the porch watching it happen the way you watch a car accident from across the street, like some part of your brain refuses to believe it's actually occurring. "Mom." Theo's voice was very small. He was right beside me. He had heard every word. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let's go back to the car," I said, because I wasn't going to cry on my grandmother's porch, and I wasn't going to say something I couldn't take back in front of my 9-year-old son. We made it halfway down the driveway. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen expecting Ivy, expecting some excuse dressed up as an apology. It was my grandmother's number. I answered it before the second ring. "Joanna." Her voice was clear, wide awake, not resting at all. "Where are you?" "I'm in your driveway," I said. "Seb sent us away." There was a pause that lasted long enough for me to understand that whatever came next was going to matter. "You get back up here right now," she said. "Both of you. You walk back up to this house and you come in through the back door if you have to, but you come in." I turned around. Theo was watching me. "Grandma says we're going in through the back," I told him. He nodded like this was perfectly reasonable, which I loved him for. My grandmother's name is Frances, but everyone who loves her calls her Frannie, and she has lived in that house outside of Harrisburg for 41 years. She raised my mother and my Aunt Deborah there, then outlived my grandfather by 15 years, then watched her daughters move away. My mother to Phoenix, Aunt Deborah to Charlotte, and still she stayed. That house was hers in every way that a place can belong to a person. Every floorboard, every draft from the kitchen window in January, every rose bush she had planted along the back fence that never quite blooms the way she wanted, but that she tended anyway every single year without complaint. I was the one who visited, not because the others didn't love her, I believe they did in their way, but because I was the one who showed up. When she had her hip replaced 2 years ago, I drove the 4 hours from Baltimore and stayed for a week. When her water heater failed last February, I was the one who called the plumber and stayed on the phone with the home warranty company for 2 hours until someone agreed to send someone out. When she couldn't figure out how to add a contact to her new phone, she called me. Not because I was especially patient, but because I had earned the kind of trust you only earn by being consistently present. Ivy had not been present. Ivy had sent flowers when Grandma had the hip replacement. Nice flowers, I'll say that. But she had not come. And then, about 18 months ago, something shifted. Ivy started visiting. She and Seb would drive up some weekends, take Grandma out to lunch, fix small things around the house. I remember being genuinely glad at first. I remember thinking, better late than never. I didn't understand what I was watching. The back door was unlocked. I let us in through the laundry room, past the stacked canned goods Grandma kept on the shelf beside the dryer, past the coat rack where my grandfather's old wool cardigan still hung. Theo reached out and touched the sleeve as we passed it, the way he always did. I don't know why he did that. He never knew my grandfather. But he did it every single time. Grandma was in the kitchen. She had the oven mitts on and was pulling something out of the oven, and she looked completely composed, which told me she had been composing herself before I arrived. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you. Theo, there are rolls on the counter. Don't let anyone tell you you have to wait." Theo looked at me. I nodded. He took a roll. I sat at the kitchen table, the one she had owned since before my mother was born. The one with the ring stain in the upper left corner that no one had ever been able to explain. And I waited while she set the dish on the stovetop and pulled off the mitts and folded them carefully over the handle of the oven door. "Tell me what happened," I said. She sat down across from me. She was 79 years old, and her hands had the look of someone who had used them for most of those years, and she looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How long do you have?" she asked. "It started," she told me, "with the paperwork. About 14 months ago, Ivy had suggested that Grandma see an estate attorney. She'd framed it as concern. 'You're getting older, Mom. You should have everything in order. Who's going to handle things if something happens to you?' Grandma had agreed, because it seemed reasonable, because she didn't want to be a burden, because that was the kind of woman she was. Ivy had arranged the appointment. Ivy had driven her there. Ivy had sat in the room. The attorney, Grandma told me, had been efficient and professional, and at a certain point there had been quite a few documents to sign. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, a revised will, updates to the deed on the house. I signed them, Grandma said. She said it simply, without excuse, the way she said most things. I trusted her. She's my daughter. The deed update, as it turned out, had not been a routine update. It had transferred a partial ownership interest in the house to Ivy and Seb jointly. The language was technical enough that Grandma hadn't fully understood what she was signing, and the attorney, who Grandma would later learn had been referred to Ivy by a friend of Seb's, had not paused to explain it clearly. I felt a coldness move through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature in the kitchen. "When did you find out?" I asked. "March," she said. "I was doing my taxes. My accountant asked me about the change in the property record." She had not called Ivy. She had not called me. She had called her own attorney. A different one she had found herself, one whose name she had gotten from a neighbor, and she had gone alone. What that attorney found was this: the document Grandma had signed did transfer partial interest in the property to Ivy and Seb. It was legal. Grandma had signed it of her own hand. But the circumstances under which she had signed, the lack of independent counsel, the rushed appointment, the presence of the primary beneficiary in the room during signing, created what her new attorney called a strong case for undue influence. "She told me I had options," Grandma said. "She told me we could challenge it." "Grandma," I said, "why didn't you tell me any of this?" She looked at me steadily. "Because I needed to be sure first," she said. And because I knew what you would do. What would I do? You'd have driven up here that same night, she said, and you would have confronted Ivy, and she would have known we were coming. I sat with that for a moment. Theo had finished his roll and was very carefully studying the pattern on the tablecloth, doing the thing he did when he was trying to be invisible so adults would keep talking. So what's happening now? I asked. The challenge was filed in September, she said. The deed transfer is being reviewed. My attorney believes the case is straightforward. She paused. Ivy found out 2 weeks ago. That explained Thanksgiving. That explained Seb in the doorway. That explained family only. She thinks if she controls the holiday, she controls the narrative, I said. That's what I thought too, Grandma said. And then she stood up, the way she stood up when a decision had already been made, when the talking part was over. That's why I called you, because today is not going to go the way she planned. We walked from the kitchen into the dining room like it was the most natural thing in the world, which I think was the point. Grandma led and I followed, and Theo followed me, and she pushed open the swinging door with the flat of her hand and stepped through it without announcing herself. The dining room was full. Aunt Deborah was there with her husband, my cousin with her boyfriend Ivy and Seb at the far end, and Ivy's face went through several expressions in the space of about 2 seconds when she saw us: surprise, then calculation, then something close to anger smoothed over very quickly into something that was trying to look like calm. "Mom," she said, "I thought you were resting." "I was," Grandma said. She pulled out her chair at the head of the table and sat down with the ease of someone who had sat at the head of that table for 4 decades and intended to sit there for quite a few more. "And then I called your sister and asked her to come in." "Joanna wasn't," Ivy started. "Joanna is my granddaughter," Grandma said. "The table was very quiet, and Theo is my great-grandson. They are welcome in my home. This is still my home." Seb looked at his plate. Ivy opened her mouth and then seemed to decide against whatever she had been about to say. My Aunt Deborah caught my eye from across the table. I couldn't tell from her expression how much she knew. We sat down. Grandma passed the sweet potato casserole to Theo first, which she accepted with great seriousness, and for a little while there was just the sound of serving spoons and the low hum of the furnace and the wind pressing against the dining room window. An ordinary Thanksgiving in all its surface details. Then Grandma set down her fork. "I'd like to say a few things before we eat," she said. "I know some of you have already heard some of what I'm about to say. I want everyone at this table to hear it from me directly." Ivy set down her fork too. The sound of it against the plate was very precise. 14 months ago, Grandma said, I signed documents that I did not fully understand. I signed them because I trusted the person who arranged that appointment. I have since learned that those documents included a transfer of partial ownership of this house. She said it plainly, without melodrama, looking at no one and everyone at the same time. I have been working with an attorney since March to address this. The transfer is being legally contested on the grounds of undue influence, which means the signing happened under conditions that the court may determine were not fully free and informed. The silence was the kind that has weight. What this means practically, she continued, is that whatever interest was transferred to Ivy and Sebastian is likely to be reversed. My attorney believes the outcome will be clear. I am telling you this now, at this table, because I don't want there to be any confusion about where things stand. She picked up her fork again. "Now I'd like to eat," she said. "The food is going to get cold." Ivy did not stay for dessert. She and Seb left about 40 minutes after Grandma finished speaking, and the thing I noticed was how little they said on the way out. No real argument. No denial. Seb said something about traffic, which we all understood for what it was, and then they got their coats and they were gone, and the room somehow felt easier afterward. Like something that had been pulled too tight had finally been allowed to release. Aunt Deborah came and sat next to me while Theo was in the living room watching the game with her husband. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since an hour ago," I said. She exhaled slowly. I knew something was wrong when she stopped taking my calls the normal way. When I'd call and she'd sound careful, like she was being listened to. She shook her head. I didn't know what to do with that. "Neither did she for a while," I said. We sat quietly for a moment, and I thought about what it cost someone like my grandmother, someone who had spent her whole life being the one other people leaned on, to admit she'd been taken advantage of by her own daughter. I thought about her going to that second attorney alone, not asking anyone for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she needed to understand what she was dealing with before she let anyone else into it. That was the kind of person she was. She faced hard things the way she faced the rose bushes that never bloomed quite right, steadily, without complaint, trying again. Later, after the dishes were done and Theo had fallen asleep on the living room couch with his shoes still on, Grandma and I sat at the kitchen table again, with cups of tea going cold between us, and she told me the rest of it. The challenge to the deed transfer was moving through the process. Her attorney had been direct with her about what the likely outcome was. The circumstances of the signing were problematic in ways that were well documented and recognizable to the court. The financial value of Grandma's house in the current market was significant. She had bought it with my grandfather for $60,000 in 1983. It was worth considerably more now. "Does Ivy need money?" I asked. Grandma was quiet for a moment. "Sev's business had some problems last year," she said. "I heard things. I don't know all of it." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would make that part less sad. "I'm not angry at her in the way you might think," Grandma said. "I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Anger passes. Disappointment just sits there and looks at you." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "What you've always done," she said. "Show up." She said it like it was a small thing. It wasn't. It had never been a small thing. It was, in the end, the only thing that had mattered. Not the documents, not the attorneys, not the court filings, just the fact that I was the one who answered when she called. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, Grandma's attorney filed additional documentation with the county. The deed transfer challenge moved forward. I'm not going to tell you it was fast or simple, because it wasn't. These things rarely are, but what her attorney had explained was accurate. A transfer signed under conditions of undue influence, with the beneficiary present and no independent counsel for the grantor, had a clear path to being unwound. The court process took 4 months. The transfer was reversed in March, just over a year after Grandma had first discovered it. The house was hers again, entirely and without complication. Ivy and I have not spoken directly since Thanksgiving. I won't pretend that doesn't ache, in the way that lost things ache even when you know you couldn't have kept them. She is my sister. She is also someone who tried to quietly take my grandmother's home. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I haven't fully made peace with that yet, and maybe I never will. Grandma updated her will last spring. She told me about it over the phone on a Tuesday evening, the way she told me most important things, casually, as if we were talking about what was for dinner. She was matter-of-fact about it, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things. Things were different now. She wanted them reflected accurately. Theo asked me once, a few months later, if Grandma was going to be okay. We were in the car. It was late and he was tired, and he asked it the way kids ask things when they're not quite awake enough to hold the question all the way in. It just fell out of him. "Yeah," I said. "She's going to be okay." "Good," he said, and he leaned his head against the window and was asleep before we reached the highway. I kept driving. The road was empty and the sky above it was that particular dark blue that comes right before it goes fully black. And I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table with her cup of tea in her house that was hers again, and about what it means to show up for someone, not once, not dramatically, not with a gesture big enough to photograph, but consistently, quietly, year after year, until the day comes when it turns out it was the whole point. I think she knew that long before I did. I keep thinking about the driveway. The moment Seb started closing that door and I just stood there. My son right beside me, both of us on the wrong side of it. There's a version of that afternoon where I drove home and said nothing, where I told Theo something vague about plans changing, where I let the silence grow the way silences do when you decide it's easier not to disturb them. I almost did that. I was halfway down the driveway when my phone rang. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something, is that what happened to my grandmother wasn't just about greed. It was about the assumption that she wouldn't notice, that she was old enough to be managed, soft enough to be misled, alone enough that no one would check. That assumption was wrong on every count, and the reason it was wrong was that my grandmother had never stopped paying attention. She had never stopped thinking clearly. She had never stopped acting on what she knew to be true, even when it would have been easier to let it go. She found her own attorney. She went alone. She said nothing until she was certain. That kind of discipline, knowing when to move and when to wait, keeping your own counsel until the moment is right, that's not something that comes automatically. That's something you build over a lifetime of making hard decisions without the luxury of a safety net. And there's a moral weight to what Ivy and Seb did that I don't think either of them has fully reckoned with yet. My grandmother trusted her daughter. That trust was used against her. Whatever financial pressure Seb's business was under, and I don't doubt it was real, it doesn't change what they chose to do with that pressure. The direction of a hard situation is always a choice. They chose to take from someone who had given them everything freely, rather than simply ask. That choice had a consequence, and the consequence was clear and documented and handed down by a court, not by fate or luck or anything abstract. Just the plain result of what they did, meeting the plain process of what exists to address it. Theo asked me once if Grandma was going to be okay. He asked it the way kids ask things when they're not filtering anymore, when the question just surfaces because it's been sitting there. I told him yes, I believed it when I said it. What I didn't tell him, because he was 9 and asleep before we hit the highway, is what I actually learned from watching his great-grandmother handle the worst kind of betrayal with the kind of steadiness most people never manage. That showing up is not a small thing. That it is, in fact, the whole thing. That kindness without consistency is just performance, and that the people who will actually be there when it matters are the ones who have been there every ordinary time before. Frannie knew who I was because she had watched me show up, not once dramatically, just again and again and again, in the boring ways, the inconvenient ways, the ways that don't make a good story. And when it mattered, she called me. I want to be the kind of person who gets that call. I think that's what I'm still working on.